Have you ever wondered where the limits of family lie? I used to think blood was priceless. That was until I came back from a 5-day business trip to find my relatives tearing apart my home to build a nest for a freeloader. They did not just want my space, they wanted my life. But they forgot one detail. The person who pays the bills makes the rules, and I am ending this game. Hello and welcome to Maya Revenge Stories. We sincerely appreciate your continued support, but we have some unfortunate news to share regarding the future of our content. YouTube has recently disabled our monetization features, leaving us entirely without an operating budget, which means we will be forced to stop uploading new videos here in the near future and shift our focus exclusively to our Patreon platform. If you find yourself enjoying today's story, please consider supporting our work by joining the Maya Revenge Stories Patreon community, where you can listen to even more incredible, exclusive true stories with much longer runtimes, highly detailed situations, and multiple emotional voice actors that we simply cannot share publicly on YouTube. You can easily join us by scanning the Patreon QR code currently displayed on your screen, or by clicking the direct link provided in the video description or the pinned comment below. Now, let us dive straight into today's deeply frustrating situation. Told from the perspective of a woman named Vanessa Hale, I am 29 years old, and after years of grinding through the corporate ladder, I finally secured a position as a creative director at EtherCore Dynamics, a highly successful and rapidly expanding tech corporation. I had worked tirelessly, pulling late nights and sacrificing my social life to build a career I could be genuinely proud of. That hard work finally paid off when I purchased my absolute dream property in the heart of Denver, Colorado. It was not just a house, it was a symbol of my independence. The estate featured a gorgeous, incredibly spacious main house with a modern layout, and right across the beautifully landscaped backyard sat a charming, fully renovated carriage house. It was the perfect setup for someone who wanted space to entertain and a quiet place to retreat. Right around the time I was settling into my new home, my parents, Robert and Martha, experienced a catastrophic financial collapse. They had always fancied themselves as savvy investors, but they ended up sinking almost all of their hard-earned retirement savings into a fraudulent, ghost real estate project. The developers vanished, and just like that, the nest egg my parents had spent decades building was completely wiped out. They were facing their twilight years with empty bank accounts and a mountain of stress. As their daughter, seeing them so utterly broken and panicked shattered my heart. I felt a deep sense of responsibility. I was young, making an excellent salary, and sitting on a property with 2 separate living spaces. It felt like destiny, out of pure love and concern. I approached them with a proposition. I invited them to move into the carriage house on a permanent basis. I sat them down and said, "Mom, Dad, you do not need to stress about money ever again. Please, come live in the back house." I did not just offer them free rent. I took over their entire financial burden. I happily paid all of their daily living expenses, covered every single utility bill, and even took care of their expensive health insurance premiums so they could experience a truly peaceful and dignified old age. For the first 8 months, our arrangement was absolutely flawless. It was the picture-perfect American family dynamic. I maintained my absolute privacy and personal space in the main house, focusing on my demanding tech career, while my parents lived comfortably and independently in the carriage house. On the weekends, we would gather in the garden for a casual barbecue, laughing over grilled burgers and enjoying the crisp Colorado breeze. I would often look out my kitchen window at their little house, feeling a profound, glowing sense of pride. I had done it. I was the successful child who gave back, the good daughter who saved her family from ruin. I patted myself on the back for doing the right thing, but I was incredibly naive. I had no idea that my boundless generosity was not being viewed with gratitude. Instead, my willingness to hand over my resources was being interpreted as a glaring weakness. I thought I was building a safe haven for my aging parents, totally unaware that I had just laid the perfect foundation for an incredibly toxic scheme. The illusion of my perfect sanctuary shattered on a crisp Friday evening. I was driving home, utterly exhausted from a grueling 60-hour work week, dreaming of a hot bath and a glass of wine. As I pulled onto my street, my headlights illuminated a massive, rusty moving truck parked illegally. It was not just parked on the curb. The heavy tires were dug deep into my meticulously manicured front lawn, crushing the expensive landscaping I had just paid to have installed. I slammed the car door and marched toward the house, my heart pounding with confusion and rising anger. There, hauling flimsy cardboard boxes through my custom oak front door, was my older brother, Derek. Derek is 32 years old and holds the delusion that he is a misunderstood startup billionaire who is just one pitch away from making a famous wealth list. Trailing behind him, carrying nothing but a designer iced coffee and her smartphone, was his pregnant fiancée, Chloe. Chloe's entire personality revolved around her desperate, exhausting quest to become a lifestyle influencer on social media. They were not walking toward the carriage house in the back. They were aggressively moving their belongings directly into my main house. Before I could even demand an explanation, my parents strolled out from my kitchen, looking entirely too relaxed. My mother smiled at me as if she were hosting a garden party. "Vanessa, honey, Derek hit a little bump in the road," she announced smoothly. She then casually explained that Derek's latest brilliant business venture had completely collapsed, leaving him bankrupt. His luxury apartment had been repossessed by the bank. Without asking me, without even sending a single text message, my parents had generously invited Derek and Chloe to move in. "The carriage house is simply too small for a pregnant woman, so we told them they could take the guest wing in your house," my father added, his tone implying that this was the most logical, natural solution in the world. I stood in my own foyer, completely ambushed. I was cornered in my own home, staring at my mother's pleading eyes and Chloe's exaggerated sigh of exhaustion. I did not want them there, but the thought of throwing a pregnant woman out onto the street at 9 o'clock at night made me feel like a monster, against every screaming instinct in my brain. I caved. I laid down strict ground rules immediately. "You can stay in the first-floor guest room," I told them, my voice trembling with suppressed rage. "But I am not your maid, and I am not your bank. You pay for your own groceries. You clean up after yourselves, and you have exactly 2 months to find jobs and get your own place." They nodded, making empty promises that evaporated the moment the sun came up the next day. By the end of week 1, the suffocating reality of my mistake had entirely consumed my life. Chloe treated my home like it was her personal, unpaid production studio. Every time I walked out of my bedroom, I had to dodge towering ring lights and step over tangled extension cords. She was constantly live streaming to her tiny audience, loudly complaining about her pregnancy and projecting a fake, wealthy lifestyle. Worse, she began critiquing my home. She claimed my interior design lacked the proper aesthetic for her brand. I came home one afternoon to find that she had casually thrown away 3 of my expensive, imported ceramic vases because, in her words, they were completely ruining the vibe of my background. Meanwhile, Derek treated my living room as his personal sanctuary of laziness. The man who supposedly needed to hustle to rebuild his life spent every waking hour glued to my custom leather sofa. He hooked up his gaming console to my massive television and blasted the volume all day long. Crushed beer cans, dirty plates, and greasy snack wrappers began to pile up on the coffee table. He made absolutely no effort to look for a job. Instead, he started using my home address to register new, shady business entities, effectively turning my safe haven into a shield to dodge the aggressive debt collectors who were constantly hunting him down. The peaceful sanctuary I had worked so hard to build was gone, replaced by a chaotic, stifling nightmare where I was treated like an unwelcome guest in my own living room. The suffocating tension in my own home was rapidly nearing a breaking point, driven by Chloe and her relentless, passive-aggressive commentary. It started as quiet whispers just loud enough for me to hear as I walked past the guest wing, but soon evolved into blatant, daily complaints. She would stand in the hallway, loudly measuring the floor space and sighing dramatically. "I just do not see how we are going to fit the artisanal wooden crib in here," she would say to nobody in particular. "And the imported nursery heater I want is going to be dangerously close to the curtains. It is just so cramped. How is a baby supposed to thrive in a literal closet?" The guest room was nearly 400 square feet, with an ensuite bathroom. But to listen to Chloe, you would think I had locked them in a dark basement. The sheer audacity reached its absolute peak during a Sunday evening family dinner. I had ordered a massive spread of premium Italian food from a high-end local restaurant, paying entirely out of my own pocket, hoping to buy just one peaceful evening. We were sitting around my custom dining table. My parents had walked over from the carriage house, and everyone was enjoying the expensive wine and handmade pasta. Out of nowhere, Derek wiped his mouth, cleared his throat, and looked at me with an eerie, rehearsed seriousness. "Vanessa, Chloe and I have been doing a lot of thinking about the future," Derek began, folding his hands on the table. "With the baby coming, this guest room situation is just not sustainable. We need real space to build our family." I took a slow sip of my water. Assuming he was finally going to announce they had found an apartment, I was wrong. "So, we figured out the perfect solution," he continued smoothly. "Mom and Dad have that second bedroom in the carriage house that they barely use. It makes the most sense for you to pack up your stuff and move into the carriage house with them. That way, Chloe and I can take over the main house. We really need the master bedroom for the nursery setup, and the open floor plan is much safer for a toddler." I froze, my fork hovering in midair. I stared at him, waiting for the punchline of a terrible joke, but his face was completely deadpan, before my brain could even process the sheer insanity of his demand. Derek reached into his bag and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents, sliding them across the table toward me. "Also," he added, as if he were asking me to pass the salt, "since I am restructuring my business portfolio, the banks are being a little difficult about my credit history. I need a guarantor for a new commercial loan to get my next startup off the ground. These papers just authorize the bank to use a small percentage of the equity in this property as collateral. It is just a formality. Really, it is for your nephew. Vanessa, we need a fresh start." My blood ran ice cold. He did not just want to evict me from the home I bought. He wanted to gamble my hard-earned property on his delusional business schemes. I looked at the papers, then looked at my parents, expecting them to immediately shut this madness down. Instead, they were nodding in agreement. "Are you completely out of your minds?" I finally snapped, my voice shaking with a terrifying mix of shock and rage. "I bought this house. I pay the mortgage. I pay for the electricity, the water, and the food you are eating right now. I am not moving out of my own home, and I am absolutely not signing away my equity so you can play pretend businessman." The moment I said no, the gaslighting began. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly from a peaceful dinner to a tribunal, where I was the villain. My mother slammed her hands on the table and burst into theatrical tears. "How can you be so cruel?" she sobbed, pointing a shaking finger at me. "You are sitting on a pile of money, living in this giant house all by yourself, and you are just going to abandon your own flesh and blood? You are acting incredibly selfish and cold-blooded. Your brother is at his lowest point, and you refuse to help him provide for his unborn child. Family is supposed to sacrifice for each other." "I am already sacrificing," I shouted back. "I am housing you all for free." "It is not enough," my father barked, jumping in to defend Derek. "You have more than you need. Why must you be so greedy with your own brother?" They had twisted the narrative so thoroughly that they genuinely believed I was the abuser and Derek was the victim. When I firmly reiterated that my answer was absolutely no, the entire family initiated a brutal, coordinated Cold War against me. My parents stopped speaking to me entirely. If I walked into the carriage house, they would stand up and leave the room in complete silence. But Derek and Chloe's retaliation was actively malicious. They turned my home into a hostile environment designed to break my sanity. Every single morning, Derek would wake up at 5 o'clock and take an excessively long, scorching hot shower, deliberately draining the water heater so I was forced to shower in freezing cold water before my high-stress corporate job. Chloe began blasting bass-heavy club music through her portable speakers right outside my home office door whenever she knew I was on important video calls. Worse than the noise was the financial sabotage. Because they had memorized my credit card information that was saved on the family food delivery app, They started ordering $100 sushi platters and premium steaks multiple times a day, charging everything directly to my account. When I confronted them about the theft, Chloe just smirked and rubbed her pregnant belly. "Stress is very bad for the baby, Vanessa," she whispered maliciously. "If you would just be a supportive sister and sign the papers, we would not have to cope with all this tension." They were trying to make my life so unlivable that I would eventually surrender my home and my assets just to get some peace. They thought they could grind me down. They thought I would break. The pressure cooker environment at home made my upcoming 5-day business trip to Silicon Valley feel less like a work obligation and more like a desperately needed escape. Ether Core Dynamics was launching a massive, highly confidential project, and I needed absolute, unbroken focus. Before calling my car to head to the airport, I did something I never imagined I would have to do in my own house. I hired a locksmith to install heavy-duty, industrial-grade deadbolts on the solid wood doors of my master bedroom and my private home office. I locked them tight, pocketed the only physical keys, and left for California, praying that a literal physical barricade would be enough to keep the madness contained. The business trip was a resounding success. In fact, my creative presentation went so phenomenally well that the executive board concluded our mandatory strategy meetings a full 48 hours ahead of schedule, exhausted but riding a massive high of professional validation. I decided to change my flight and head back to Denver 2 days early. I did not text my parents. I did not call Derek. I did not want to give them any time to prepare their usual complaints. I just wanted to slip quietly into my house, order some takeout, and sleep in my own bed without having to brace for a draining confrontation. The moment my rideshare pulled up to my driveway, a cold, heavy knot formed deep in my stomach. There were 3 unfamiliar white cargo vans parked aggressively on the street, blocking my driveway. I walked up to the front porch and realized my custom front door was propped wide open with a heavy cinder block. A thick, choking cloud of white drywall dust hung in the air of my foyer, coating the floors and the artwork. Then I heard it, the deafening, rhythmic crash of sledgehammers slamming into structural beams, accompanied by the high-pitched, ear-piercing scream of power saws. The violent noise was coming directly from upstairs. It was coming from my locked sanctuary. I sprinted up the hardwood stairs, my heart hammering violently against my ribs, and stopped dead in my tracks at the top of the landing. The upstairs hallway looked like a war zone. My personal belongings, the intimate pieces of my life, were piled in careless, haphazard heaps all over the floor. My expensive dual monitors, my encrypted company hard drives containing highly sensitive EtherCore corporate data, and irreplaceable framed photos of my college graduation were just tossed unceremoniously onto a filthy, dust-covered tarp. The glass on one of the wooden frames was completely shattered. A sickening wave of nausea washed over me. I forced myself to look up down the hall. The solid oak doors to my bedroom and office had been completely ripped from their hinges. The door frames splintered and ruined. Inside, a crew of 5 burly men in heavy work boots and hard hats were actively obliterating the wall that separated my private office from my master bedroom. The beautiful space was completely gutted, reduced to exposed wooden studs and dangling electrical wires. I stood there, utterly paralyzed, watching absolute strangers tear apart the home I had bled and sacrificed to build. Then, my mother casually walked out of what used to be my walk-in closet, holding a contractor's clipboard and sipping a cup of coffee. She stopped abruptly, her face instantly draining of color when she saw me standing there 2 days early. My father bumped into her from behind, a tape measure in his hand. They were not just innocent bystanders. They were actively supervising the destruction of my property. "Vanessa," my mother gasped, dropping her coffee mug. It shattered on the floor, splashing dark liquid over the white dust. "You are supposed to be in California." I could barely force the words out of my throat. "What are you doing to my house? Who are these people?" I demanded, my voice shaking so violently I barely recognized it as my own. My father stepped forward, puffing out his chest and adopting his usual, insufferably condescending tone. "Now, calm down. Derek and Chloe absolutely needed the space. And since you were being so unreasonably stubborn about moving to the carriage house, we decided to take matters into our own hands. They are turning these 2 rooms into a mega master suite and nursery. Once the wall is down, it will be absolutely perfect for them. The room began to spin. The sheer, unfathomable violation of it all threatened to physically crush me. But then, my eyes landed on the clipboard my mother was holding. It was a contracting invoice. I stepped forward and snatched it directly out of her hands. The total estimate at the bottom read $15,000. The payment had been processed in full just 24 hours ago, but it was the payment method listed at the bottom of the page that made the blood freeze solid in my veins. It was a receipt for a credit card swipe, a card in my name, a card I had never even held in my own hands. A week prior, I had received a digital notification from my bank about a new backup credit card being mailed to my home address. I had not seen it in the mail and assumed it was simply delayed in transit. The horrifying truth hit me like a physical blow. Derek had intercepted my mail. He had stolen a high-limit credit card issued exclusively in my name, forged my signature to activate it, and swiped $15,000 of my own money to pay a demolition crew to destroy my bedroom. And my parents stood guard over the workers to ensure the job was finished before I returned. "You knew about this," I whispered, glaring at my parents with a look of pure horror. "You let him steal my mail. You let him commit felony credit card fraud." "Do not use such ugly words," my mother hissed, her face contorting into a mask of indignant anger. "He is your brother and he was desperate. We were just going to surprise you. We figured once the wall was down and the work was finished, you would just have to accept it. The baby needs this space more than your computers do. What is done is done. Vanessa, you can just sleep in the guest room on the first floor now. The family has made a decision." At that exact moment, something inside me completely snapped. The panic, the confusion, the lingering guilt of a daughter desperately trying to please her family, all of it vanished instantly, evaporating into thin air. It was replaced by a hollow, terrifyingly calm void. There would be no more negotiating. There would be no more yelling. There would be no more second chances. They had crossed a massive line, transitioning from being obnoxious, entitled house guests to literal, documented criminals. The time for being a good, accommodating sister was officially over. It was time to become their absolute worst nightmare. I did not scream. I did not shed a single tear. My mother physically braced herself, clearly expecting an explosive, hysterical argument. But I simply turned my back on her and walked straight over to the head contractor. I pulled out my phone, navigated to the county property tax portal, and pulled up the official digital deed to the estate. "I am the sole legal owner of this entire property," I said, my voice eerily steady and devoid of all emotion. "The man who signed your contract has absolutely zero legal authority over this building. You are currently committing illegal, unauthorized property damage. I suggest you pack up your tools and leave my house this instant, before I call the police and have every single one of you arrested for felony vandalism." The foreman took one look at my screen, his face dropping in horror. He cursed under his breath, shouted a command to his crew, and ordered them to drop their tools immediately. Within 10 minutes, they had grabbed their equipment and fled the property, terrified of the legal backlash. My parents were deeply unnerved by my icy silence. My mother opened her mouth to argue, but my father grabbed her arm. "Let her cool off," he muttered nervously. "She will see reason once she calms down. Let us go meet Derek and Chloe at the baby boutique." They practically scurried out the front door, leaving me completely alone in the dusty wreckage of my home. That was their final, fatal mistake. The moment their car pulled out of the driveway, my predatory instinct took over. I became a machine of pure, calculated logic. First, I walked through the ruined hallway, taking dozens of high-resolution photographs of the smashed drywall, the splintered door frames, and my damaged electronics. I carefully placed the $15,000 invoice my mother had dropped into a plastic folder. Then, I dialed the fraud department of my bank. I did not mince words. "I am reporting a massive case of identity theft and credit card fraud," I told the agent. I provided the exact details. lock down every single financial account connected to my Social Security number, and officially flag the $15,000 charge as criminal theft. Next, I contacted a notoriously ruthless real estate attorney I had previously worked with through my corporate job. I explained the situation with clinical precision. Within 2 hours, his legal team had drafted two devastating sets of documents. The first was an emergency eviction order for Derek and Chloe, because they had committed malicious destruction of private property. State law allowed for their immediate, unceremonious removal without the standard waiting period. The second document was a formal 30-day notice of termination of housing support and tenancy for my parents in the carriage house. While waiting for the legal documents to be digitally delivered, I began picking up my scattered belongings from the hallway floor. As I moved a heavy armchair, my foot caught on a thick leather portfolio shoved desperately out of sight underneath it. I opened it, expecting to find Derek's delusional business plans. Instead, I uncovered a goldmine of absolute betrayal. The folder was stuffed with printed bank statements, offshore wire transfer receipts, and shell company registrations. Derek was not bankrupt at all. He had purposefully liquidated his assets and hidden hundreds of thousands of dollars in dummy corporations to defraud his original investors. He had faked his financial ruin and was using my house as a legal shield to hide from process servers, all while playing the starving victim to leech off my resources. With the ultimate ammunition safely in my hands, I made one final phone call. I hired a premium, emergency residential security firm. I paid them triple their normal rate to dispatch a crew to my home immediately. For the next 5 hours, a team of technicians systematically ripped out every single standard lock on the main house. They installed heavy-duty, commercial-grade biometric smart locks on all the exterior doors. I personally reprogrammed the master codes, encrypted the entire security network, and disabled all old access permissions. By the time the sun began to set over Colorado, my house was an impenetrable fortress. I poured myself a tall glass of ice water, sat in my ruined office, and waited in the quiet shadows for my loving family to come home. Around 8 o'clock that evening, I heard the crunch of heavy tires on my driveway. The 4 of them tumbled out of my father's car, laughing loudly and carrying oversized shopping bags filled with premium baby clothes and expensive home decor. They marched up my front steps, expecting to waltz right into the house they had just ordered demolished. Derek confidently punched his usual access code into the keypad. A harsh, bright red light flashed, accompanied by an angry buzzing sound. He frowned, muttered something under his breath, and typed it again, red light, denied, before he could start pounding his fists against the solid wood. The smart lock clicked open from the inside. I pushed the door wide open, stepped out onto the porch, and looked down at them, without saying a single word. I grabbed 2 massive garbage bags, filled with every piece of clothing and personal item Derek and Chloe owned, and I hurled them violently down the steps. The plastic bags hit the concrete walkway, splitting open and spilling designer shirts and makeup all over the yard. "What the hell is wrong with you?" Derek roared, his face instantly turning purple with rage. He lunged forward, grabbing the heavy door handle and trying to force his way inside, but I slammed my palm against his chest and pushed him backward. "You selfish, narrow-minded witch! Open this door right now!" My mother immediately started wailing, clutching her chest in a theatrical display of panic. "Vanessa, how could you? Chloe is heavily pregnant and exhausted. Let us inside this instant." I reached into my back pocket and pulled out a stack of freshly printed papers. I threw the top packet directly at Derek's face. The sheets fluttered in the wind and landed at his feet. "That is the official police report and bank fraud filing," I said, my voice cutting through the crisp night air like a knife. "I reported the $15,000 charge you made to the demolition crew. The bank knows you stole my mail. They know you forged my signature. The police are currently en route to arrest you for felony credit card theft and identity fraud. Unless you want to be in handcuffs in the next 5 minutes, you will get off my property right now." Derek froze, his aggressive posture completely vanishing. "You would not," he stammered, his eyes darting around nervously. "Oh, I absolutely did," I replied, pulling his thick leather portfolio out from behind my back. I held it up so the bright porch light illuminated it perfectly. I also found your little secret stash under the armchair. Derek, the offshore accounts, the shell companies. I know you are not bankrupt. You are just a cowardly scam artist. I paused, savoring the absolute terror washing over his face. And just in case you were wondering, I spent the last hour scanning every single page of those banking records and emailing them directly to the legal team representing the investors you defrauded. You are not just getting kicked out today. Derek, your fake rich facade is over. Chloe let out a high-pitched shriek of pure panic. The wealthy, successful lifestyle she thought she was marrying into had just shattered into a million unfixable pieces right in front of her. She looked at Derek in absolute horror, realizing she was tied to a broke criminal. My father stepped up, his face red with a mix of fury and disbelief. "Are you insane?" he bellowed at the top of his lungs. "Are you really planning to throw your own flesh and blood out onto the street?" I looked him dead in the eye, completely devoid of any sympathy. I handed him the second legal packet. "I used to have a family," I declared, my voice ringing with absolute finality. "But you chose to be parasites and thieves. This is a 30-day notice of eviction for the carriage house. Clear your belongings out of the carriage house in exactly 30 days, or I will have the police physically throw you both out." Right on cue, the flashing red and blue lights of 2 squad cars turned the corner and illuminated my street. I had called the non-emergency dispatch line 20 minutes prior, requesting a civil standby to ensure my unwanted guests left the premises safely. The officers stepped out of their vehicles, their hands resting on their utility belts. Under the strict, unblinking supervision of law enforcement, there was no more yelling, there were no more threats. Derek and Chloe were forced to humiliate themselves, crawling around on my front lawn to gather their scattered belongings. They shoved their trash bags into the trunk of a beat-up sedan they had borrowed and drove away into the pitch-black night, completely penniless and facing a mountain of criminal charges. Fast forward exactly 1 month later, true to the eviction notice, my parents were forced to pack up their comfortable life. They had to rent a cramped, cheap apartment on the outskirts of the city, relying solely on whatever tiny scraps of savings they had left. I did not offer a single dime to help them move. As for my home, it is finally mine again. I hired a legitimate contracting crew to repair the damage upstairs and redesign the entire space into a breathtaking, state-of-the-art home office. Tonight, I am sitting in my brand new plush leather chair, sipping a glass of expensive red wine, looking out over my peaceful, perfectly quiet property. I realized that cutting out the toxic, malignant tumor called blind family loyalty was the single greatest decision I have ever made. I am free. I am wealthy. And absolutely nobody can bother me ever again. The game is over. And I won. Thank you so much for listening to my story until the very end. Where are you listening from today? Please let me know in the comments below. As a quick reminder, if you enjoyed today's story, YouTube has disabled our monetization features, leaving us entirely without an operating budget. This means we will be forced to stop uploading new videos here in the near future and will shift our focus exclusively to our Patreon platform. Please help us by joining the Maya Revenge Stories Patreon community to listen to the best exclusive, true, and long-form stories that we simply cannot share publicly on YouTube. You can easily join us by scanning the Patreon QR code currently displayed on your screen, or by clicking the direct link provided in the video description or the pinned comment below. Thank you, and take care.